1996 was a big year for Baltimore sports as the Orioles were good again, and for the first time in 12 years, a new football team was coming their way, as the Cleveland Browns moved from Ohio to Baltimore and became the Ravens. And in the Ravens' 28-year history, they've made the playoffs more than 50% of the time, and even won a couple Super Bowls. So, I think a team with that much success would have stability at the most important position in football, the quarterback position. And the answer is, recently, yes, but early on, no, that really wasn't going on. The Ravens were somehow finding ways to stay competitive, despite not being able to find their long-term single color. And today, I wanted to go through all 23 Ravens quarterbacks who have started at least one game. We're talking about starts. We're not talking about people who came in and maybe did a little bit in relief. These quarterbacks had to have at least started one game. And you figure, since you're starting from the beginning in 1996, we gotta go with the first quarterback in Ravens history, Vinny Testaverde. This was an interesting career point for Vinny Testaverde. It was his 10th year in the league, and he had kind of revamped it in 1994, making the Pro Bowl with Cleveland, but taking a step back in 1995. But in 1996, at age 33, Vinny Testaverde would have arguably his best year in the NFL. Despite the Ravens' 4-12 finish, Vinny Testaverde threw for over 4,000 yards with 33 touchdowns and would make the Pro Bowl. He would be the only Ravens quarterback to make the Pro Bowl for the next 23 years. And as a matter of fact, his records of passing yards in a season and passing touchdowns in a season would also last for about 2 decades. He would then start the next year and regress, and Eric Zeier stepped in for 3 games, and he actually played pretty well, having a touchdown-interception ratio of 7-1, and the Ravens went 2-1 in those starts. But nonetheless, Eric Zeier didn't seem like he was the Ravens' answer either, and Vinny Testaverde was entering free agency at the end of the season. So in 1998, the Ravens needed to do something at the QB position. They kept Eric Zeier. They drafted Wally Richardson, although he would take a few snaps in 1998. He would never start a game. They decided, why not go out and sign 35-year-old QB Jim Harbaugh? No, not current Ravens coach John Harbaugh, his younger brother Jim. Now, at the time, this signing actually kind of made sense. I mean, in 1995 and 1996, Jim Harbaugh resurrected his career, helped leading the Colts to the playoffs and an AFC Championship game in 1995. Now, who was his head coach in that 1995 season where he finished 4th in MVP voting? Current Ravens head coach Ted Marchibroda, who was already on the hot seat this year, but the Ravens made some moves that would make people think that they could be a playoff contender, and they had a really good defense that year, a solid run game, but the quarterback play again was abysmal. Jim Harbaugh started 12 games, they had a losing record, and he wasn't anything spectacular, and Eric Zeier started in 4 games, and although he played better, still couldn't help the team get over that hump, and after a 6-10 finish, the Ravens were ready to clean house at quarterback. Now when I mean clean house, I mean fully wipe the slate clean. Jim Harbaugh, gone. Eric Zeier, gone. That guy they drafted, Wally Richardson, yeah, he's gone. Meaning that the Ravens needed quarterbacks and they needed them fast. So in 1999, with a new head coach under the helm, Brian Billick, who was more an offensive-minded coach, the Ravens made some moves. First, they would bring in veteran QB Scott Mitchell on a deal, I guess just to kind of maybe have as a backup. 27-year-old unknown quarterback Stoney Case would also come in and get some playing time, while the big trade was they traded for, at the time, St. Louis Rams quarterback Tony Banks to be the long-term guy at the age of 26. Banks would miss the first 6 weeks with injury. Stoney Case and Scott Mitchell had to hold it down. Mitchell started the first 2 games of the year where he was absolutely terrible, and by week 3, Stoney Case would get the start, and even though he wasn't much better, the Ravens, behind a solid defense, would go 2-2 in his starts. And by the time Tony Banks came back, the Ravens actually finished with a winning record under Tony. He went 6-4 and threw 17 touchdowns to 8 picks, so a solid touchdown-interception ratio. Only problem was he barely completed over 52% of his passes, so the accuracy was still an issue. But the Ravens showed signs of improvement this year, going 8-8 with an offense that was now kind of middle of the pack, whereas before it had never really been anything spectacular. So Tony Banks must have been the answer, right? Well, in 2000, the Ravens did draft a quarterback out of Louisville, Chris Redman, and they brought in a veteran QB named Trent Dilfer, who the Buccaneers had kind of given up on, to be Tony Banks' backup. And Tony Banks through the first 6 weeks of the season, was playing fairly well. I mean, in week 2, he had an excellent game against the Jaguars to help the Ravens come back from 23-7 down to win the game and beat the Jaguars for the first time in their franchise's history. But after a 5-1 start, the Ravens fell into a 2-game losing streak and had now had 4 consecutive games without scoring a touchdown. And the question was, do the Ravens make that quarterback change? And Billick decided to go to the man they signed in the offseason, Trent Dilfer. And in his first start as a Raven, it didn't go well either.
Mother trucker, dude!
Ravens failed to score a touchdown for the 5th consecutive game. They lost, but then they wouldn't lose again that entire season, as the Ravens won their last 7 regular season games, all with Trent Dilfer at the helm, including their first 4 postseason games in team history, which led to them going to the Super Bowl and absolutely just mollywopping the Giants.
You're in big trouble, though, pal. I eat pieces of shit like you for breakfast.
You eat pieces of shit for breakfast?
No.
But with these stats with Banks and Dilfer, the Ravens felt they can do better in 2001. I mean, they had one of the best defenses in NFL history, and they have a solid run game, now with Jamal Lewis at the helm. So, they decided again to clean house at the quarterback position outside of Chris Redmond. Dilfer, gone. Banks, gone. Send in 38-year-old QB, Randall Cunningham. But don't worry, he's not there to be the starter. No, this move for a while was the biggest move in quarterback the Ravens made up to that point, and that was signing 31-year-old Elvis Grbac to a 5-year deal. Now, when I mention Elvis Grbac here, it's going to seem like, oh, he was a bad player, why did the Ravens sign him? But when the Ravens made this deal, people were kind of praising it. I mean, in 1999 and 2000, Grbac was a Pro Bowler, 4,000-yard passer. I mean, this is what the Ravens needed to get their offense to the next level. The only problem was Jamal Lewis, who ran for 1,300 yards his rookie season in 2000, ended up suffering a torn ACL in training camp, meaning that he was going to be out the whole season, and the Ravens just kind of threw out these different running backs and Terry Allen, Jason Brookins, Mo Williams, and could never really find that stability there. And although Grbac became the first Ravens QB since Vinny Testaverde in their inaugural season to throw for 3,000 yards, he threw for 15 touchdowns, 18 picks, completed less than 60% of his passes, and won barely half the time. Randall Cunningham even started 2 games, appeared in 6. The Ravens won both of his starts, and he played pretty well, and the Ravens went back to the playoffs. But nonetheless, I mean, outside of winning in Miami, where they were pretty dominant on the defensive side of the ball and getting back to running the ball, Elvis Grbac had a terrible game in the divisional round against Pittsburgh, and he had enough. Throughout the whole season, he was getting booed by Ravens fans, as we thought he was going to be the guy, at least for half a decade, to ride the quarterback position and finally give us some stability there. But it wasn't, and it was just too much for him. And surprisingly, he retired at the age of 32 at the end of the season, meaning in 2002, now with the Ravens in cap hell enough as it is, as they had to cut a lot of key players, it was time to upgrade the quarterback room again, or at least upgrade in this situation. The Ravens finally gave third-year quarterback Chris Redmond a chance to start, and really wasn't terrible. I mean, in 6 starts, the Ravens went 3-3. He did throw 7 touchdowns to 3 picks, but his completion percentage wasn't great. Again, pretty much helped out by the Ravens' defense. But then they decided to pull the plug on that and go to a veteran QB, 32-year-old Jeff Blake, who a lot of people forget was a Raven, but he was signed this year as kind of like a holdover and a veteran mentor to the young Chris Redmond, who to this point hadn't started a game yet. And he actually played very well too. Jeff Blake completing about 56% of his passes, over 2,000 yards. And sure, the Ravens had a losing record with him at the helm, but the Ravens finishing 7-9 I don't think was on anybody's bingo card in 2002, as with all the moves that they had to make, getting rid of people just to make cap room, a lot of people didn't think the Ravens would be even in playoff contention, but through the first 15 weeks, 14 games, they were 7-7 and had a shot until losing in week 16. But again, the Ravens weren't satisfied. So in 2003, they did something they had never done before, and that is draft a quarterback in the first round. You would think a team that's had so much question marks at quarterback that would have done this at least once before 2003, but no. They had never tried to do this before. I don't know if it's just because of fear. Maybe they felt like they didn't need it at the time. But, you know, they decided to go in and draft a college QB who was a so-called first-round talent. Now, they did bring in 27-year-old Anthony Wright to act as a backup, but the quarterback they drafted was an intriguing prospect, but definitely had more flaws than I think the Ravens realized. So, after taking Terrell Suggs early on in the first round, the Ravens then traded back in to draft University of California quarterback Kyle Boller.
Hey Baltimore, I'm Kyle Boller.
Now, what Brian Billick really liked about Kyle Boller was his arm. Dude had a cannon, but the problem was there was some accuracy issues involved, and a lot of the time when you're an NFL quarterback and you had accuracy issues in college, coming in and trying to fix those accuracy issues right away can be a problem. And hey, Kyle Boller beat out Anthony Wright for the starting job in the 2003 season, meaning that the first ever first-round quarterback pick in Ravens history was going to be the signal caller week 1. How did Kyle Boller do exactly? Well, he played like a rookie. He threw 7 touchdowns, 9 picks, barely completed under 52% of his passes, and barely over 1,200 yards. Now, to be honest with you though, this year, Kyle Boller didn't really need to do much of anything because Jamal Lewis went on an absolute tear this season. Just 2 years after tearing his ACL, he would go on to have 2,066 rushing yards and win Offensive Player of the Year. Also had one of the best defenses in the league that did help Kyle Boller get to a 5-4 start in his early career. But then an injury kept him out the rest of the season, meaning that Anthony Wright was going to have to take over. And in 7 starts, Anthony Wright, again, completed about 53% of his passes, more touchdowns than interceptions, and actually had a record of 5-2 as they lost his first game against the Miami Dolphins, and later against the Raiders, they would lose in a game there. But he's infamous for one game with the Ravens, and that is against the Seattle Seahawks in Week 12 of the season. The 5-5 Ravens, now on a 2-game losing streak, were trying to get back in the win column against a pretty tough Seahawks team that was coming in at 7-3, leading their division. The Seahawks were actually getting to this Raven defense, scoring 41 points, and had a 17-point lead with 4 minutes left. But then Tony Banks all of a sudden worked his magic with a TD pass on a 4th and 26 that sort of happened by accident to Marcus Robinson, who, by the way, caught 4 of his 6 TDs as a Raven in this one game.
My left stroke just went viral.
Going towards the end zone. Robinson goes up, makes the catch, touchdown Raven. Caught by Marcus Robinson, he gets away. Marcus Robinson, who already has 1 touchdown today, gets his second. Right. Going for Robinson again. Marcus Robinson, what an adjustment. His 3rd touchdown reception of the quarter, this time from 25 yards away. 4th and long. Right. Robinson had a chance, he tipped it, and it's caught. Frank Sanders is there to catch the tip pass from Marcus Robinson, and it's a first down for the Ravens. Here's Wright. Quick pass. Threw it up too high. Robinson does get that 4th touchdown.
Tony Banks would lead the team down the field for what would end up being a game-tying field goal to send the game into overtime, which the Ravens would then win 44-41, getting their biggest comeback in team history at the time, and they did it in about a 5-6 minute span.
To win it in OT officially from 42 yards away. And the Ravens have won it.
And not only did he throw for 300 yards and 4 TDs in this game, but later, after the game, he found out that his wife had given birth to their first child, so a not too shabby day for Mr. Wright. The Ravens would win their division for the first time ever and would not win a playoff game, as they lost to the Tennessee Titans by 3 points in this game, where Anthony Wright played solid but not solid enough. In 2004, the hope was that now with a healthy Kyle Boller, he would show improvement, and I guess you can say he kind of did. I mean, he accomplished something that only one other Ravens quarterback had done, and that was starting in every single game, all 16 of them, which had only been done by Vinny Testaverde at the time in the Ravens' inaugural season in '96. So that must mean Kyle Boller put up some stellar numbers, right? Well, despite the Ravens' 9-7 record, he threw for under 2,600 yards and did have a touchdown reception ratio of 13-11, but nonetheless, it was wasn't great. But not to say the Ravens didn't try to get him help in the receiving core this year, as the receiving core ended up being one of the worst I think I've ever seen this year. But they tried. They really, really did. As in the offseason, they announced that they were going to trade and that a trade was happening for 49ers star wide receiver Terrell Owens. But Owens had a change in heart, I guess because he knew the Ravens were a run-first team with a young quarterback and he didn't want to deal with it. So he said, I'm not going to Baltimore. To which the Ravens then decided to just let him go to Philadelphia, and that was the story there. It seemed like the red flags were there with Kyle Bowler, but the Ravens were like, you know, he's still young, he's still learning, and he did show some improvement this year, so we're gonna let it go for another year. And in 2005, the Ravens actually did go out and get him some weapons. They drafted Mark Clayton in the first round, they went out and got Derek Mason, and they still had Todd Heap on the roster along with Jamal Lewis. So now, Kyle Bowler has more offensive talent around him than he's ever had. So that must mean that 2005 was great, right? Look, it's the same pattern over and over again. It was not. I mean, sure, when he was in the game, the Ravens won more often, going 4-5 in his starts, but having 1,800 passing yards, 11 touchdowns, and 12 picks will not suffice. And Anthony Wright, although had a better completion percentage, was not much better. The Ravens went 6-10, missed the playoffs again, and at this point, the Ravens were fed up with Kyle Bowler. So what was the logical thing to do here? Go out and get a veteran quarterback. And in 2006, the Ravens made a free agency signing that I still stand by is not a great free agency signing. But in 2006, it wasn't looking like that when the Ravens would end up having, at the time, their best season in team history. Former Tennessee Titans quarterback Steve McNair was now a Raven at the age of 33, and there was a lot of questions as to his health heading into this year, as he had had his 2004 and 2005 seasons cut short because of injuries. But hey, I mean, this year, Steve McNair, who played in every game, only got sacked 14 times, so obviously, when you're not getting hit much, you have a better chance at staying healthy. And he started every single game. And how did the Ravens do in those games? They went 13-3. And for the longest time, this was the Ravens' best regular season record in their history. They got the number 2 seed, and they were one of the favorites for the Super Bowl, as the Chargers were the only team that had a better record than them. And teams like the Colts and Patriots were good, but had their flaws to where people thought they might not be able to make it to the Super Bowl this year. And Steve McNair was actually pretty good himself. 63% completion percentage, over 3,000 yards, more touchdowns and interceptions. Kind of played a game managing role for a team that, again, ran the ball well and, hey, had the number 1 defense in the league. I mean, the Ravens had 60 sacks this year, which is still the team record. And hey, even in the divisional round at home against the Colts, they held Peyton Manning to 5 field goals. So that must mean the Ravens eked out a win, right? They got a couple touchdowns and a field goal that would put them at 17. That's enough to win the game, right? Well, the Ravens kicked 2 field goals themselves and lost this game because that's just Ravens football for you.
Are you serious? This is torture. You're torturing me and everyone else watching.
But hey, there was still hope with the Ravens organization heading into 2007. I mean, McNair was the starter, Kyle Bowler was still there as the backup, and they even drafted a Heisman Trophy winner in Troy Smith in the late rounds. But 2007 is arguably seen as the worst season in Ravens history, and for good reason. Most people give their 96 season a pass because, hey, even though it's the worst record in franchise history in a regular season, that was our first year. A lot of teams don't do well in their first year, it's fine. But this season in particular, we were coming off our best season in franchise history, so how would we respond? Well, I mean, the Ravens were 4-2 in their first 6 games, meaning that in the 22 games since getting Steve McNair, the Ravens were 17-5 in their last 22 regular season games, putting them at one of the best records in the NFL. But early on, Steve McNair would deal with a lot of injuries, meaning that Kyle Bowler had to get thrown into the fray, and after that 4-2 start, the longest losing streak in team history would take place. 9 consecutive losses dropped the Ravens to 4-11. They would win their Week 17 game against the Pittsburgh Steelers, but at that point, the Steelers knew their playoff positioning, had the division clinched, and the Ravens didn't have anything to play for, so it was a meaningless game at that point. Combined Bowler and McNair, they went 4-10 with 11 touchdowns, 14 17 interceptions, and that rookie Troy Smith even got a couple of starts in Week 16 and 17, losing the Week 16 matchup against the Seahawks and winning the Week 17 matchup against the Steelers because, again, when you're playing a bunch of the Steelers' backups, it made it easier to win that game. Now, injuries did deplete the Ravens this year. I get that. I understand that. But just the fact that it went so downhill so fast, the season got Brian Billick fired, so now the Ravens weren't just trying to find a QB, but they were trying to find a new head coach to run the team. And remember in 1998 when a little quarterback named Jim Harbaugh came in to quarterback the Ravens and that was a failure? Well, just 10 years later, the Ravens decided, you know his brother, the special teams coach for the Eagles, John Harbaugh? Let's bring him in to be our head coach. And a move that was kind of questioned at first. I mean, John Harbaugh was a young head coach at this time, no head coaching experience, so there was a lot of question marks as to would he even be able to turn this team around, how long would he be able to last, and little did we know, the Ravens hit the coaching jackpot. The Ravens also did something that, well, they hadn't done much outside of 2003 when taking Kyle Bowler in the first round. They took a quarterback in round 1 of the NFL draft. Now, heading into 2008, the quarterback draft class was not strong. It was headlined by Matt Ryan, who would go top 5 to the Atlanta Falcons, which made sense. They needed a quarterback at the time. And the other quarterback that was kind of being talked about that could potentially be a mid to late first rounder was Michigan's Chad Henne. Well, with Matt Ryan off the board and the Ravens, trading back to the 22nd pick, it was only inevitable that they tried Chad Henne at quarterback, right? Well, no. The Ravens decided to go with a little-known quarterback out of Delaware named Joe Flacco.
I'm Joe. Mama.
Needless to say, people were confused, but, we gotta realize Joe Flacco wasn't supposed to be on the field his rookie season. He was supposed to be the third-string quarterback behind Kyle Bowler and Troy Smith, but the football gods were on Flacco's side. In the Week 1 preseason game for the Ravens against the Patriots, Kyle Bowler would tear his ACL and would be out for the season, and also around this time, the backup, who was now supposed to be the starter, Troy Smith, would come down with a very serious illness that kept him sidelined for half the season, meaning that Joe Flacco was now the new quarterback for the Baltimore Ravens, the 16th different quarterback to now go out and start a game for this team. The Ravens won the first 2 games in the Joe Flacco era before losing 3 straight, and throughout this time, Joe Flacco had 2 touchdowns and 7 interceptions, looking like he was going to be another Kyle Bowler. But then things started to pick up as the Ravens won 9 of their last 11 regular season games to go from 5-11 to 11-5 and a wild card spot. And Joe Flacco, for a rookie, put up nice numbers. He was just under the 3,000 yard mark, ended up throwing more touchdowns and interceptions after a rough start in that category, and he completed 60% of his passes and started every single game. And in the playoffs, well, things were going well for the Ravens. Even though they beat the Dolphins and Titans, Joe Flacco wasn't necessarily fantastic in either one of those games, but he did what the other quarterbacks couldn't do, and that was he didn't turn the ball over, and the Ravens were able to make the plays when it mattered, and they won the game. I mean, heck, in that Titans game where the Ravens won 13-10, Joe Flacco had 2 really big completions, one to Mason and one to Clayton, one which went for a touchdown, and that was about it. And yet they still won the game despite being out-yarded 391 to 211.
Titans rush 4. Flacco on the press. He steps up. Throws deep. Far sideline. He's got Mason at the 10. 5. Touchdown! Derek Mason! Thrown down near sideline. Ball hangs in the wind. Look out. Mark Clayton's got it. 10-yard line and he's inside the 5.
What a play by Clayton.
Meaning that for the first time in NFL history, a rookie quarterback was going to be playing in the AFC Championship game with a chance at making the Super Bowl. And who was the Ravens' opponent in this AFC Championship game? None other than their division rival, the Pittsburgh Steelers, who they lost to twice in the regular season. But the Ravens didn't get blown out in those games. They lost by 3 and 4, and the second game was a little question because Santonio Holmes, caught the ball, but the ball never crossed the plane, so I don't know where they're getting that touchdown call from.
Oh, that's close.
Bitch, is you blind?
And the Ravens put up a fight with 4 minutes left in the game. They were only down by 2, meaning that, hey, if you're a rookie QB Joe Flacco, the pressure's still on you, but you only need to go down the field and get into Matt Stover's range to potentially attempt a game-winning field goal. You don't need to get in the end zone. Well, Troy Polamalu happened.
Picked off Polamalu. Polamalu going right. The field is open. Aaron Smith shields. Flacco. Polamalu takes it home. Super Bowl 43. Pittsburgh might be bound for that thanks to number 43.
And the Ravens would lose 23-14, but it's big progress. New head coach who seems to know what he's doing, rookie quarterback who exceeded expectations in year one because he was thrown into the starting role, one win away from a Super Bowl. I mean, the Ravens went from team that was supposed to be rebuilding to Super Bowl contender just like that. And things would stay well at the quarterback position for the Ravens, as Joe Flacco from 2008 to 2014 would not miss a single game, and each year he would continue to improve. 2011, the Ravens went back to the AFC Championship game where they would lose a heartbreaker to the Patriots because you know who didn't know how to make a field goal at this point in time.
32 yards to tie it. And the kick, look out! Look out! It's no good! It's no good!
And then in 2012, the Ravens' hopes of winning another Super Bowl happened, as after a 9-2 start to the season, which saw the Ravens not have Terrell Suggs for the first half and lost Ray Lewis and their best corner Ladarius Webb midway through the season, the Ravens hit a skid, losing 4 of their last 5 regular season games, limping into the playoffs at 10-6. This time, the reason the Ravens made the playoffs was in spite of their defense, because it was just kind of mediocre that year. The offense really had to step up, and it did, and Joe Flacco, he stepped up in a big way, as once the 2012 postseason came, he was almost unstoppable.
Flacco was bringing on, gets it to Pitta, takes it across for the touchdown. Flacco's going to the end zone to Bolden, he comes down with it. Touchdown Ravens.
Flacco with time, gonna go deep, has a man open down the middle of the field, it is caught, touchdown, Torrey Smith. Flacco gonna go deep down the sideline. Caught for the touchdown. Flacco stepping up and throwing deep down the far sideline. Caught into the end zone. Touchdown, Jacoby Jones.
Flacco throws, got his man. Hunter ball. And Bolden has it in a slot, and they're going back to Bolden for the touchdown. Flacco end zone bound, and he's got a touchdown. Play action fake to Rice. Flacco has Pitta for the touchdown. Touchdown Baltimore. Flacco heaves it down the field. Open as Jones catches it on his back. He can get up. Jones makes the shift. Jones to the end zone, and he's in for the score. What a play by Jacoby Jones.
Now, the Ravens did with Joe Flacco what they couldn't necessarily do with Kyle Bowler. Early on in his career, they gave him weapons. I mean, when he came in, he had Derek Mason, Todd Heap, even Mark Clayton for a little while. And then in his third year, they brought in Anquan Bolden, who was probably the biggest Ravens free agent wide receiver at the time, although it was a trade, but you get what I mean. It happened in the offseason. 2011, they drafted Torrey Smith and brought in Lee Evans, and Lee Evans didn't turn out well, but Torrey Smith did. And of course, in 2012, with Anquan Bolden and Torrey Smith leading the way in the receiving corps, the tight end corps of Dennis Pitta and Ed Dixon also did very well, and this gave Flacco more options than ever. Not to mention his backfield partner, Ray Rice, was also doing things to take the pressure off of him. Joe Flacco had another 3 TD pass game in the playoffs against Denver, where the Ravens won in not 1, but 2 overtimes. It is, as of filming this video, the last NFL game to go into double overtime, because the only way you can do that is if it's a playoff game, because playoff games can't end in ties. There has to be a winner. But after Corey Graham picked off Peyton Manning again, Justin Tucker, a rookie kicker, made the 47-yard field goal that was sending the Ravens to the AFC Championship game for the 2nd year in a row and the 3rd time in 5 years. And wouldn't you know it, the Ravens were going to the same place and facing the same team that they did exactly 1 year ago, and that was Tom Brady and the Patriots. And in the first half, it looked like the result was going to be the same. Patriots led 13-7. Ravens couldn't really do anything offensively. But then, not only did the defense clasp down and not allow a single point in the second half, but the offense would go on to score 3 straight touchdowns and beat Brady's Patriots 28-13 on their way to a 2nd Super Bowl. And wouldn't you know it, another game where Joe Flacco threw for 3 TDs. And heading into the Super Bowl, he wasn't going to get slowed down. In the first half, he threw 3 touchdown passes to 3 different receivers, Anquan Bolden, Dennis Pitta, and Jacoby Jones, and at halftime, the Ravens had a 21-6 lead. Jacoby Jones would then return the opening second half kickoff, 109 yards for a TD to put the Ravens up by 22, and it seemed inevitable that the Ravens were going to run away with this game, but then, well, you already know.
Why is the clock stopped?
Of course, this shit would happen to the Ravens. I mean, why wouldn't it? Of all things to happen during the Super Bowl, the power goes out, and the momentum seemed to shift the 49ers' way, as a game that was once 28-6 is now 34-29, with the 49ers moving inside the Ravens' 10 with just minutes left to play. But Ray Lewis, who we knew was retiring at this point, Terrell Suggs, and Ed Reed, the three, Hall of Famers on that Ravens defense, said, you know what? If this is going to be Ray's last season here and even Ed Reed's, let's make one last defensive stand together. And they did just that, even though Jimmy Smith may or may not have been holding Michael Crabtree, leading to Jim Harbaugh with one of the biggest freakouts ever. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention that too. This Super Bowl was between John Harbaugh and former Ravens quarterback Jim Harbaugh, as he resurrected the 49ers franchise, and it was also the first, and to this day still only, Super Bowl matchup where both the head coaches were brothers. The Ravens won this game 34-31, and Joe Flacco had completed one of the best postseasons in NFL history, as he had 1,100 passing yards with 11 touchdowns and 0 turnovers, no interceptions, no fumbles, the entire postseason, leading to a big contract extension. And then this is where things get a little shaky in the career of Joe Flacco. Now, the next year, with Ray Lewis's retirement, Ed Reed going, all this, and Anquan Boldin leaving, the Ravens kind of found themselves in a not necessarily rebuilding, but a retooling year. And Joe Flacco would throw for almost 4,000 yards, but for the first time in his career, he would throw more interceptions than touchdowns. And when I mean interceptions, he threw 22 of them. But the Ravens also threw it over 600 times, which is something they usually don't do, because their run game was absolutely abysmal this year. Now, in 2014, the Ravens looked to fix, the mistakes of the receiving core and, the running game, as they went out and got Justin Forsett, who would turn out to be a big piece of the 2014 team. And of course, they would bring in Steve Smith Sr., a guy who was run out of Carolina for, the new fan favorite Cam Newton, and he was out to show the Panthers that even at 35, he still had it. And well, let's just say him and Joe Flacco meshed together very well.
X-Go, give it to you. Fuck, wait for you to get it.
On the move, throwing, and that's complete on the far side of the field. Steve Smith with a big gain. Flacco to throw, near sideline. That is grabbed by Steve Smith Sr. Got time, lofting it up, tip, caught. That is Steve Smith Sr. for the touchdown. Flacco on first down, under pressure over the middle. He's got his man, number 89, Steve Smith Sr. Flacco lost the handle, picked it up, throws it downfield to the end zone, caught for the touchdown by Steve Smith Sr.
This is a nail. Him in a coffin. You're dead. Take your ass back to Carolina. Make sure you mow my lawn too while you're out there. Keep it clean for me.
Oh, and Joe Flacco had arguably his best season ever, as he completed over 62% of his passes, which is 14 yards shy of his first ever 4,000-yard season, and he would throw the second most TD passes in Ravens history in a season at 27, and those interceptions that he threw last year, the 22 of them, went down to 12 this past year, which is about what he was averaging per year before 2013. And after missing the playoffs the year before, the Ravens would go back to the postseason, and in the wild card round, they would take down the Steelers in Pittsburgh, where again Joe Flacco outplayed Ben Roethlisberger, as playoff Joe Flacco just kept rolling. And then in the divisional round, a familiar foe going back to New England, the Ravens had two 14-point leads, which they squandered, and they lost the game, 35-31. And heading into 2015, the Ravens were once again playoff contenders, but a lot like 2007, the Ravens couldn't avoid the injury bug. Now, this season for the Ravens is interesting because you look at their record and you look at how many games were decided by one score, and you wouldn't think the Ravens were this bad, as 14 of the 16 Ravens games that year were decided by a measly one score, 8 points or less. But they went 5-11. So what happened? Well, injuries happened. Justin Forsett, the leading rusher from a year ago, broke his arm. Steve Smith Sr. also didn't, have a good end to his season, having a tear in his ACL. And Terrell Suggs was also out by week 1 because of a season-ending injury. And then there was the big one. Joe Flacco, who had never missed a start in his NFL career, got knocked out in week 11 for the entire season after a torn MCL cut his 2015 year short. Now, the Ravens season was pretty much over at this point. They did win this game that Joe Flacco tore his ACL in, 16-13, because it happened right at the end of the game, so he just kind of handed the ball off for 3 plays and let Tucker come out and kicked the game-winning field goal. But they were 3-7 in his 10 starts. He threw 14 touchdowns, 12 interceptions, and all in all was kind of having a down year from the year before. That led to the question, who's next in line? Because it's been a while since we've talked about a different quarterback starting in a game for the Ravens. Now it's the time of Matt Schaub. And Matt Schaub was at an interesting point in his career where he had one of the biggest fall-offs ever, and it was kind of smart that the Ravens got him as a backup this year because, well, Tyrod Taylor, Joe Flacco's backup from 2011 to 2014, was off to become a starter in Buffalo, so the Ravens wanted a veteran presence at backup, sort of similar to what they did in 2010 when they brought Mark Bulger in, and Bulger never took a snap as a Raven. And in 2 games, the Ravens did go 1-1 in Matt Schaub's start. Now granted, that win wasn't necessarily because of Schaub. He threw a pick late in the game that led to Cleveland attempting a game-winning field goal, and then Will Hill decided to do this as time expired.
And it's blocked. And it's picked up by Will Hill. Will Hill runs down the sideline. Hill's going to get a block. Will Hill is going to win the game on a blocked field goal. Unbelievable!
And the next week in Miami, despite the Dolphins not really moving the ball worth a crap, the Ravens still lost 15-13 because a pick six early in the game that had the Ravens down 15-3 by Matt Schaub. They couldn't climb out of that hole. But then he gets hurt, so now it's time for Jimmy Clausen, and this is where the 2 games that the Ravens were blown out in come into play. As with Jimmy Clausen as the starter, the Ravens offense all of a sudden just kind of sputtered out of control, as it seemed like they just couldn't get back into things. They lost both of Jimmy Clausen's start, one of which I was there for, the Week 15 game against the Chiefs in Baltimore when the Ravens wore the gold pants and lost 34-14. Yeah, I was there for that.
Look at this dude.
So after 2 unsuccessful starts with Jimmy Clausen, the Ravens decided to go with Ryan Mallett, a former backup to Tom Brady and a somewhat successful Texans quarterback. He had a couple of good years for them, but nothing spectacular. And in his 2 starts, let's just say they were actually pretty solid. In his first start, the 4-10 Ravens were hosting the 9-5 Steelers in Baltimore. And this was a big game for the Steelers because if they won, they were in. Whereas if they lose, then they don't control their own destiny anymore. And with the Ravens knowing their fate, they thought, you know what, we beat them once already early in the year, let's play spoiler. And Ryan Mallett, in his first game after having just 3 days of practice, went 28 of 41 for 274 yards, 1 touchdown, and 0 interceptions, and the Ravens beat the Steelers 20-17. I know that's how weird this season was for the Ravens. They go 5-11, but they sweep the Steelers for the 3rd time in franchise history. Like, it was just so weird. But then Ryan Mallett all of a sudden became a quarterback that, hey, you know, we're down with. It's only for 2 games, but we're down with it. And even in the Week 17 loss to the Bengals, the Ravens still played well, lost by 8 points, and finished the year 5-11, their worst since 2017. Joe Flacco would come back in 2016, and he would actually have a good year for his standards, throwing for 4,317 yards, which is now the Ravens franchise record for passing yards in a season, breaking Vinny Testaverde's 1996 franchise record of 4,177. He would complete 65% of his passes, along with a high for Ravens quarterbacks in a season at 672 pass attempts. And he got back into the 20 TD pass category, throwing 20 exactly. The next year, he would actually digress, but the Ravens somehow got better. I mean, they were 4-5 at the bye week, but coming out of the bye, heading into Week 17, they had won 5 of 6 and were 9-6, and they were in a win-and-in situation in Week 17 for the playoffs. All they had to do was beat the lowly 6-9 Bengals, and well, let's just say Tyler Boyd kind of ended that hope.
4th down. Dalton steps up. Dalton throws. It's complete. Caught by Boyd. Tyler Boyd. Touchdown. Remarkable.
Frickin' bricks! When will you learn? When will you learn that your actions have consequences?
Ravens went 9-7, missing the playoffs for the 3rd straight year, which is just one of 2 times the Ravens have missed the playoffs 3 times or more in a row, with the only other time that happened was the Ravens' first 4 years of existence in 1996 to 1999. A year after throwing for 4,300 yards, Joe Flacco barely reached the 3,000 threshold, and he just kind of looked like he was about done. But the Ravens were going to stick to him heading into 2018. But they knew they needed a backup plan. And thus, the Ravens had one. As in the first round with the 25th pick, they decided to take tight end Hayden Hurst out of South Carolina. Okay, that question I picked from the beginning, but, you know, the Ravens did need a tight end, so it made sense. Now, the 2018 quarterback class was actually one of the best in recent memory. I mean, when the Ravens picked first-round QBs in 03 and 08, there weren't necessarily strong quarterback classes. But this time around, the question was, would Baker Mayfield or Sam Darnold go number one? Would Josh Allen go in the top 10? And where would guys like Josh Rosen go as well? But there was one quarterback that hadn't been picked yet, and that quarterback was a Heisman Trophy winner out of Louisville named Lamar Jackson. And with the 32nd pick coming up, the defending Super Bowl champion Eagles not needing a quarterback, the Ravens decided to call them up on the phone and say, hey, we'll give you these picks if you give us this pick because we know who we're going to take here. The Eagles accepted, and with the 32nd pick in the NFL draft, the Baltimore Ravens brought in their quarterback of the future.
With the 32nd pick in the 2018 NFL draft, the Baltimore Ravens select Lamar Jackson. Quarterback, Louisville.
But it would have to wait for Lamar because the first 6 games of the season, the Ravens started 4-2. Joe Flacco was playing well, and it didn't seem like he was going to get slowed down, but then a 3-game skid happened where Joe Flacco would get hurt, and the Ravens were 4-5 heading into the bye week once again. So there was a question as to who the Ravens throwing at quarterback now that Joe Flacco's hurt. Do they go with the savvy veteran that they brought in to mentor Lamar Jackson and maybe even play a little bit, Robert Griffin III? Or do they start the rookie who they know isn't quite ready yet, but is probably their best option at this point? And during that bye week, the Ravens decided to scrap the Joe Flacco playbook in favor of a Lamar Jackson-led playbook. His passing numbers weren't fantastic, he ran the ball well, and the Ravens were winning. As a matter of fact, in the 7 games that Lamar started in that regular season, he went 6-1 as a starter, with the only loss coming in overtime in Kansas City to an MVP Patrick Mahomes. The Ravens also took advantage of a Steelers collapse late in the year to take the AFC North and head to the playoffs. Now, in the playoffs, things didn't go well. Ravens fell behind the Chargers 23-3, a team that they had played just a couple weeks before in LA and actually beat. But 2 late TD passes by Lamar Jackson had the Ravens down by 6, and the team got some hope, but it was shattered quickly as a late fumble in the game that knocked the Ravens way back ended up being the end of their season. But nonetheless, a new era was here. Joe Flacco was then traded away, meaning that Lamar Jackson was now the guy to call the plays in the Ravens backfield. And in 2019, Lamar Jackson would do something that no Ravens player had ever done before, and that was he would win MVP.
It's a 2nd down and 3. Jackson takes it himself. Look at him dart back and forth. Oh! He broke his ankles. Now he's got an entourage, and he's got a touchdown. He is Houdini.
3,000 yards passing, 66% completion percentage, breaking the quarterback rushing yard record of 1,206, and not to mention a touchdown to interception ratio of 36-6, which those 36 TD passes breaks the Ravens' record for TD passes in a season, breaking again Testaverde's 96 record of 33. And after the first 5 games where Lamar Jackson had 6 touchdowns and 5 interceptions, for the rest of the regular season, he would throw 30 touchdowns, just 1 interception. And the Ravens would finish with their best record currently in their franchise's history, going 14-2. Now the question was, though, with the Ravens playing in a lot of blowout games, would they be able to play from behind? Because, again, Lamar Jackson didn't necessarily have a talented group of pass catchers.
A group of pill pushers?
In the divisional round, as the Ravens were the 1 seed for the first time ever, they were playing the 6-seeded Tennessee Titans, and they got their butts kicked.
Out of my way! Out of my way! Can't you see he's gonna kick my butt?
Hi there, young people. Nice day today.
And the Ravens were one and done in the playoffs again, leading to many questions into 2020 as to how could the Ravens rebound. Now, I must throw in, too, in 2019, Lamar Jackson didn't actually play in every game. He played in 15 of the 16, as after winning their Week 16 game against the Cleveland Browns to clinch the number 1 seed in the AFC playoff, they decided in Week 17 to play RG3, and of course he did RG3 things, but the Ravens still won that game by 18 over the Steelers, so RG3 then became the 18th different quarterback to start a game for the Ravens that year. 2020 was an adventure for not just the Ravens, but the NFL in general, as the coronavirus kind of slowed everything down and had the NFL season in question. Now, at this point in time, the MLB and NBA were playing games, so the NFL was like, if they can do it, we can do it too. No big deal. So they decided to put rules and precautions in, and they made it happen. For the first 8 weeks of the season, the Ravens were 6-2, looking like they were going to be the favorites in the division again. But then they hit a skid. They lost to the Patriots in Sunday Night Football on a rainy day. They lost their rematch to the Tennessee Titans in overtime, blowing a late 21-10 lead. And then on a game that was supposed to be on Thanksgiving was pushed back to the following Wednesday. The 6-4 Ravens were going to Pittsburgh to take on the 10-0 Steelers with RG3 at quarterback. Why RG3? Well, because the reason this game got pushed back almost a week was because many Ravens players came down with the coronavirus, including Lamar Jackson, meaning that all those players were ineligible to play. And really, it wasn't necessarily a bad game. The Ravens at one point were up 7-6, were only trailing 12-7, but RG3 had to leave the game with an injury, bringing in Trace McSorley, who, with the Ravens down by 12, he threw a long TD pass to put the Ravens within 5. The Ravens would lose that game, fall to 6-5, and now they were left with a predicament. You win out and make the playoffs, or you probably don't make the playoffs at all. Nonetheless, things started to turn around. The Ravens then played a Tuesday night matchup, again a game that was supposed to be on Thursday, but pushed back because of coronavirus. They beat the Dallas Cowboys 34-17, and then the next week on Monday Night Football, in a, what you would say, classic game against the Cleveland Browns, the Ravens came out on top in one of the craziest games you're ever going to see. Ravens were 7-5, Browns were 9-3. This was big for both teams' playoff hopes. And in a game that was back and forth, Ravens trailing by 1, Lamar Jackson, he got knocked out of the game. He was going to the locker room getting fluids.
Are you pooping?
And with no RG3, that means Trace McSorley came in, but wait a minute, he hurt his ankle. So now, what do the Ravens do at quarterback? Well, wide receiver Willie Snead was warming up on the sideline after McSorley got hurt to be the emergency quarterback, but then a miracle happened. Lamar Jackson came back out onto the field, 4th and 10, Ravens down by 1 on their side of the field. And what does he do? He immediately throws a touchdown to Hollywood Brown.
Jackson trying to throw for it, and he's got it. Marquise Brown hangs on to the football and scores.
With the game tied at 42 late in the contest, under a minute left, Lamar Jackson led the team down the field where Justin Tucker would kick a game-winning 56-yard field goal because he's Justin Tucker. The Ravens won 47-42, and in their toughest game during this stretch, they got a much-needed win because then they beat the lowly Jaguars, Giants, and Bengals to go back to the playoffs at 11-5, and they finished in second place because even though the Browns finished with the same record that they did, the Ravens swept them that year, meaning that they had the tiebreaker over them, and they were this close to taking the division from Pittsburgh, as after an 11-0 start by the Steelers, they slumped their way to a 12-4 regular season finish, and they didn't even win a playoff game. However, the Ravens did, and they were taking on a familiar foe, the Tennessee Titans, but this time it was in Tennessee. And the Titans got out to an early 10-0 lead, and you're thinking, oh boy, here we go again. But down 10-3 late in the game, Lamar Jackson did this.
Jackson trying to escape and run for it, and he's got it and more. Lamar Jackson down the sideline. Will they give it to him? They will.
The Ravens would win that game 20-13, making it the first playoff win in Lamar Jackson's career, and they were on to the divisional round in Buffalo where they would play the Bills, and well, if you like defense, then the game's for you, because for the most part, both defenses played well. Ravens defense allowed just 10 points, the Bills defense allowed just 3, even though Tucker did miss a few kicks in bad weather. But the Bills won the game 17-3 because late in the game, Lamar Jackson threw a red zone interception, pick 6, that ended up being the deciding factor. And this was just another year where Lamar was good, and he was being questioned whether he could, win the big games or not, that being the playoff games. But again, still stability at quarterback as he started all but one game, that being the game he missed because of COVID. And in 2021, things would also get interesting again. The Ravens were 8-3. Lamar was having one of his best passing seasons statistically, but after a loss in Week 14 to the Cleveland Browns dropped the Ravens to 8-5, Lamar Jackson would go down with an injury that would keep him out for the rest of the year. He was 7-5 in those 12 games started, and even missed a game in between there because he was sick, and Tyler Huntley would become now the 19th different Ravens quarterback to start a game. And he did win that game against the Chicago Bears 6 16-13, but his next 3 starts after the Lamar Jackson injury, they would lose. Granted, they were all in close fashion. As a matter of fact, the only game the Ravens got blown out in where Lamar Jackson was not the QB was the one game where Josh Johnson started because Tyler Huntley, I believe it was like some sort of ankle injury or something that he had, and they went in with Josh Johnson against the Bengals, and even though Josh Johnson played well, the Ravens lost by 20. You're not going to believe this, because remember back in the video when I said the Ravens have had 23 different starting quarterbacks in their history? Well, editing in my head and talking about this whole video, I forgot about the Josh Johnson start, even though I just mentioned it in this video, meaning that there has actually been 24 different starting quarterbacks in Ravens history, so go ahead and cancel me because I was off by 1. Sorry about that. And all of a sudden an 8-3 record turned into 8-9, and the Ravens missed the playoffs for the first time in the Lamar Jackson era. And in 2022, it was almost deja vu all over again for the Ravens, as Lamar Jackson was coming into a contract year, and a lot of the question was, were the Ravens and Lamar Jackson going to get a contract done? They were doing well. They were 7-4 through their first 12 games. Lamar was playing good, and they were heading into a game where they were playing the Denver Broncos, who were struggling at this point in time. And Lamar Jackson left the game in the first quarter with an injury. The Ravens had to go to Tyler Huntley again, and with the Ravens down 9-3, Tyler Huntley then led the team down to what would end up being the game-winning touchdown drive and a 10-9 victory to put the Ravens at 8-4. But again, Lamar Jackson was hurt, leading many to think, is he even going to come back? I mean, without this contract, I wouldn't even think that he is going to come back. The Ravens did go 2-3 in their last 5 regular season games, actually winning a couple games out there while Lamar was injured. And heck, even in week 18, it wasn't even Tyler Huntley that started the game. He was under concussion protocol. The Ravens already had the playoffs clinched at this point, so they decided to let Anthony Brown start his one and only game with the Ravens, and it was atrocious, and the Ravens lost. But have no fear, in the wild card, they were going right back to Cincinnati to take on those same Bengals, where Tyler Huntley would come in and get the start, and he would actually play pretty well, but it's one play that will infamously go down that Tyler Huntley will be remembered for in that game, and that's this.
Put them right around Huntley. He reaches. Oh, that ball's out. That's live. Back the other way. Sam Hubbard, the Cincinnati kid. Hubbard's got a convoy. Chased by Andrews. At the 30, the 20. He will score.
And that ended up being the deciding factor, and the Ravens lost 24-17. I guess the thing you can say about this season was the Ravens realized how much they needed Lamar Jackson, and they weren't going to let him go. They were 8-4 with him as a starter, and even though Huntley showed improvement with a 67% completion percentage, and even making a Pro Bowl somehow, I still don't know how that happened, the Ravens' 2023 offseason then was all about Lamar. Lamar this, Lamar that. Oh, he asked for a trade. Is he going to get traded? And on draft night of 2023, all those questions were answered.
We have some major breaking news. Sources say Lamar Jackson and the Baltimore Ravens have agreed to terms on a brand new contract extension.
You know, for the last few months, there's been a lot of he say, she say, a lot of nail biting, a lot of head scratching going on. But for the next 5 years, it's a lot of flock going on. Let's go, baby. Let's go, man. Can't wait to get there. Can't wait to be there. Can't wait to light up M&T for the next 5 years, man.
And the Ravens decided this time around to actually build around him, getting guys like Nelson Aguilar, Odell Beckham Jr. out there at wide receiver. They finally had a healthy Gus Edwards coming out there and doing his thing running the ball, as he had 13 rushing touchdowns. This was also a year where the Ravens had a new offensive coordinator in Todd Monken, who was looking for Lamar to run less, which he did, only 148 times, and his passing, well, this ended up being his best passing season of all time, where he completed 67% of his passes, had 3,600 passing yards, and another great touchdown to interception ratio of 24-7. Tyler Huntley would start Week 18 after the Ravens had the AFC North and the number 1 seed clinched. They would lose the game 17-10 to the Steelers, but nonetheless, the Ravens were 13-4. They were the 1 seed in the AFC again, and this time around, they looked like they could do it. I mean, now the playoffs ran through Baltimore, and in the divisional round, after being tied 10-10 at the half with the Houston Texans, the Ravens would outscore the Texans 24-0 in the second half to win 34-10, meaning that they were set up in the AFC Championship game against Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs. And, well, I mean, hey, you know, the Ravens held Patrick Mahomes to 17 points, but they lost the game.
I wanna die. I don't wanna live anymore.
Death! Death! Take me away! I don't wanna live another day!
Lamar Jackson would win his second MVP, almost unanimous again, as there was only one voter that didn't vote for him. Someone voted for Dak Prescott because, you know, reasons. And it seems like the Ravens have their best quarterback in franchise history, as even though Joe Flacco is still the leader in most of the Ravens passing categories, Lamar Jackson is on his way to shattering most of those records, and maybe even becoming the Ravens' all-time leading rusher in the fray. So yeah, that is the history of all 24 Ravens quarterbacks to start a game for the franchise. A franchise that for a while was just not a quarterback team, and over their past 2 first-round picks have changed that immensely, and now they become a team that, you know, you really want to play for because, hey, they got this guy quarterback that could help take them to the Super Bowl, and I want to win a Super Bowl. So that's it for me. Stay safe out there, and until then, I will catch you all in the next one.